Welcome in to episode 414 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridgette Prue and Scott McLaughlin. The first time the three of us are back together since the happenings of the trade deadline. And Bridgette and Scott, as everybody predicted, the Bruins have now gone 2-0 since the deadline. Not just 2-0, but defeating the Tampa Bay Lightning in Tampa, shutting them out on home ice for the first time all season. Tampa Bay, who had been on a hot streak. And then they come home and they complete a come-from-behind third-period victory against the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. And Bridgette and Scott, that game last night was, in my estimation, the game of the season for Boston and a game that they've lost all year. So, yeah, let's just break it all down because it's been an interesting week for the Boston Bruins.
Yeah, the Bruins are back. We got a hockey team to talk about.
No, so
Stanley Cup chase is on.
I was gonna say that en route to a Stanley Cup, just an undefeated run from the trade deadline till they lift the cup over their head. But that is actually kind of where my opening shift starts, which by the way, quick detour already. But in my doc where I write, all my Bruins notes per game, I always write my important notes at the top. And the very first note in my doc from yesterday was, I almost ran over Brad Marchand on the way in, LOL. Because I was driving in, I was stuck in traffic.
That's not the first time. That's not the first time, Bridgette.
Bridgette is really going to extremes after this trade. I told her, you can't cross lines. You can't start trying to run over the guy just because he's not a Bruin anymore.
But Scott, real quick, Bridgette, didn't you almost run a player over in years past?
2 years ago, this will tell you exactly when it was. It was in the playoffs, and it was Pasternak and Bertuzzi crossing the same exact spot. It's across. It's like this where they park is right on the bottom floor, and then they there's a pole, and they just pop out from behind it, and then they walk in front of my car. There's supposed to be a guy that's directing traffic to stop you because you can't really see them coming. And anyway, that guy's never there. So yesterday it was one of those things where I was so shocked at what I had seen. So I wasn't expecting to see him 30 minutes before the game, in his suit. And I stop and I look and I double take it. I'm like, what the heck? It's Brad Marchand. He's looking at me. I'm looking at him. I just wave. He waves back and we just both start dying laughing. And then I drive away what the heck just happened? That was before I even made it inside the rink. And I was like, that would have been bad. But also it was a funny moment because I think he recognized who I was and just was like, what the hell? But anyway, that's how it started, and that's my opening shift.
That was Brad Marchand's second close call of the day. I was gonna wait to bring this up in mind, but I'll just mention now, his very first drip. So he skated with the Panthers at the Garden they were on for 11, 12 minutes. It was nothing serious. But Marchand went out, skated, did some drills, and the very first drill he stepped on a puck and almost wiped out into the boards. And I was like, oh, that is just what he would have needed. It's re-injure his shoulder, stepping on a puck, and he was fine. But sure enough, his new teammates had fun with that. They were all banging their stick on the glass and everything.
Yeah, and I know there was some confusion about that too. That he's gonna play because he took morning skate. It's no, he's still, the timeline of 3 to 4 weeks is still, as far as we know, really what the timeline is. But I'm sure it was a weird day for him. Besides him almost dying because I ran him over, he must have been up I assume on the 9th floor. I just don't know where
he was watching. He watched from the Panthers locker room.
Watch from the Panthers locker room.
Yeah.
He probably knew I was on the 9th floor and wanted to be as far away from me as possible. But so that's interesting actually, because that's a weird place to watch again. The emotions that you feel when you're watching it with your own eyes is much different than if you're watching it off a TV in a locker room or anywhere, right?
I think he probably didn't want to be bothered, or he didn't want to be near anyone really. Which is also why they didn't do any kind of tribute video, because he wasn't out there to see it. He wouldn't have been anywhere that cameras would have been able to show him for fans to applaud or anything like that.
That is so it was calculated like well in advance. It sounds like, but anyway, like that. I was imagining him sitting up there having to watch David Pastrnak score and like not cheer for him. Like you just like be like, yeah, oh no, I can't actually this time. But and also just hear how loud the crowd was. Like, I don't know. If they had showed him, it certainly would have been a good reception. So it's kind of weird that that's not really what the plan was. But anyway, we'll get to my real opening shift after that. That nice one. So my real opening shift is about the team that's on the ice now and the support that they were getting at TD Garden. Yesterday was against Florida was their first game at home after the trade deadline. And that crowd was way louder than I was expecting. I was expecting a somber crowd. A lot of fan favorites got traded away before the game started. Scott and I and a few of the other reporters were looking into the crowd to see how many jerseys we could see of guys that were actually still on the team, because there's so many Marchands, there's so many Bergeron's, there's so many, even Coyles, like just to try to find, besides Pastrnak and Swayman, we couldn't find any other jerseys of any other guys that were on the team.
Or that were in the lineup. Like, obviously, like, there were McAvoys.
Yeah, there was McAvoys and there was Patra. But that was actually playing in the game. So basically, like, thinking, okay, that a lot of these people's favorite players are gone. So, like, when you bought these tickets, these were the tickets to buy. Like, pre-knowing all this information, like, Bruins, Panthers, at the beginning of the season, that this was the game to go to. And I was just wondering if it was going to be as electric as what you would think. And it was, especially in the third period. And that game, the first game after the deadline, they're able to win 4-0 against Tampa Bay. And I know that you guys probably felt the same way, that it was like, all right, that seemed like it might have been a fluke, especially since 2 of their goals were scored from the other side of the ice. But you're like, okay, that's probably a one-off. Well, I'll tell you what's not a fluke. Going down 2-0 against the reigning Stanley Cup champions and scoring 3 goals in the third period and showing the fight that it takes to beat that team. And I know they don't have Makachuk, but the Bruins don't have anyone that they had in that playoff series either. Like, they don't have, talking about the first meeting, like, they don't have Bergeron, they don't have Krejci, they don't have Marchand, they don't have McAvoy. So, yeah, maybe Florida was missing one guy, but the Bruins were missing.
Well, Aaron Ekblad too,
and
the now suspended Aaron Ekblad.
Yeah, that's a whole story in and of itself. But anyway, I was really impressed with the comeback effort, and I was impressed with the fans. I felt like they are now willing to give this team another chance, whereas they had given up on the first iteration of the Bruins. Now that there's so many new people in the lineup and that they're kind of the underdogs, like it's like the fan base is like, this is a fresh look. Like, we're giving you a fresh chance. Like, go out there and we'll judge you now that we see you, and what you're actually made of. So that's just a vibe check from TD Garden. Vibes were good, right, Scott? Vibes were pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, with the comeback and the Zadorov fight, beating down Sam Bennett, which I know is going to be part of Brian's opening shift, but like, that was as loud as I've heard the Garden in a long time. Like, that was as raucous as it's been pretty much all season. And yeah, look, fans are open to being won over. And a game like last night, following on the heels of Saturday's effort, like, that wins fans over. Even if everyone knows, like, of course they're not a cup contender. Like, look at this roster. It's not very deep. It's not very good. But hard work is gonna get you a long way. Like, fans will applaud that if they see the effort and they see a gutsy performance and the physicality, and of course, if you're gonna knock off Sam Bennett's head, like, that's gonna help. So yeah, like, they're open to being won over if they can keep up this effort. Like, I don't know if they can keep up the results. We'll see, but right now, yeah, it's a group that has that scrappy underdog feel, and sports fans by their nature, like, latch onto a team like that.
Yeah, and look, obviously the roster needs work, and this is not a Stanley Cup caliber roster. We'll find out if it's even a playoff roster. But can I tell you guys a bit of a secret? It's kind of the elephant in the room. The roster wasn't any good before the deadline either. It also was very far away. Scott, I heard you talk on Sunday's Skate, and you talked about how you're not sure if this is a retool, it might be a rebuild. And I'm not even here to disagree with that. But outside of the Marchand trade, the roster was already, in my opinion, very far away. They already had a ton of work to do. And I think that, we'll get into it as this episode goes along. The Marchand trade, I kind of want to set aside when we talk about what the roster looks like pre-deadline and post-deadline, because he's a major loss on and off the ice, especially from a production standpoint on the ice. But the NHL players out versus some of the NHL players in addition to the picks and prospects, it's a different look, but we can break it down because I want to put a pin in that because it's worth talking about. Rightfully so, the Marchand trade gets a lot of attention, and we're going to talk about it to start this podcast too. But beyond the Marchand trade, I think Bruins fans are looking at the product on the ice the last two games and saying, because don't forget, the Bruins weren't playing with Marchand anyway up until the deadline because of his injury, and they wouldn't be with him right now anyway. So, yeah, I just think people are realizing some of the NHL skill sets that came in versus the ones that left and the differences between the two. And so we'll get into all that. My opening shift, as you alluded to, Scott, has to do with Nikita Zadorov. And I was at practice. I made it a point to go to practice at Warrior this week because I wanted to see their first practice at Warrior post-deadline. I wanted to see, which individuals would step up vocally, or I wanted to see the pace of practice. And Scott, you've been to far more practices than me this year. I've probably been to about, between training camp and the regular season, maybe 15 or so, maybe 20. But I would say, in my opinion, that practice this past week was very sharp. It was probably one of the sharper practices I've seen, and more up-tempo practices I've seen the Bruins have all year. Now, again, I don't have as big of a sample size as you do, but that's just in my experience. And at the beginning of that practice, actually before that practice began, 10 minutes before, at 10:50, Nikita Zadorov was the first Bruin on the ice in the first team practice at Warrior, I believe, since the trade deadline. And he took part in a couple of one-on-one drills with Jay Leach. Okay, they worked on puck retrieval, breaking the puck out. They worked on some blue line, offensive zone blue line drills. And then as his teammates were filtering on, Jay Leach and Zadorov continued to work one-on-one. And I know Zadorov has been a player that's caught in a lot of heat from Bruins fans due to his contract, but I really don't think he's been that far off of what was expected of him or what people should have expected from him. And if you want to bash the player, go for it. But I mean, I don't think this is a player that doesn't care, as evidenced by him being the first guy on the ice. And then you talk about the game he played in Tampa Bay and the game he played against the Panthers last night. And in a very vulnerable week for Bruins fans, Nikita Zadorov's fight against Sam Bennett provided Boston fans with something that they needed. I think it's also been a couple of years in the making. And one-on-one, Sam Bennett versus Nikita Zadorov, and it was a major moment, and it was a leadership moment. The Bruins, they lost a lot of leadership between Coyle, Carlo, and Marchand, and we've talked about Pastrnak stepping up. Obviously, McAvoy's out of the lineup right now, but I think Nikita Zadorov has done a good job in the last couple of days since the trade deadline, and I know he would say it's how he's been all year. Jeremy Swayman was asked about it after the game. Scott, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, but Swayman said something along the lines of, since the deadline, he's been like that all year. So maybe he has been like this all year, but in a week where the team needed somebody to step up outside of David Pastrnak, I think Nikita Zadorov has, and I think it's worth mentioning for my opening shift.
Yeah, and I want to get back to that later because he made some comments even before the trade deadline, and then he made some comments in the locker room last night about having always been in that leadership mentality since he started in the league. So we'll definitely get into Zadorov and his way of thinking about what's going on. But first, we got Scotty over here for his opening shift. Wait, am I putting the wrong way?
Yeah, you are. You've confused
Mine is
yourself.
like mirrored, so I'm always pointing the wrong way. So I'll pretend I'm pointing at Scar now. But
That was
I'm with stupid.
that was Bridget's best scarecrow impression, telling Dorothy where the
Yeah.
yellow brick road was.
oh man, I don't know.
Yeah. So my opening shift is, as I hinted at, about Brad Marchand, who only 4 days after getting traded was back at TD Garden on the ice Tuesday morning with the Panthers for their morning skate. As Bridget said, he's still considered week to week. Paul Maurice, Panthers head coach, said they hope he'll be ready for games late in the regular season. So that's just about that time frame, like 3 to 4 weeks out. Marchand then met with Boston media afterwards and held a press conference for a half hour, which is much longer than normal press conferences or locker room scrums involving players or even coaches or even general managers. Like even with Sweeney on Friday after the trade deadline, I think that ran right around 20 minutes, maybe just over. And from Marchand, that was also after he had his introductory press conference down in Florida on Monday, and that went about 20 minutes. So he really answered, pretty much everything. Obviously, wasn't going to go into like all the details of what happened with contract negotiations and all that stuff, but yeah, had a lot of interesting things to say, and didn't when he was asked if the Boston chapter of his career was completely over, he didn't completely close the door. He basically said, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what the summer's going to look like. He said that he wasn't surprised that they ended up making big changes, and he was well aware that he was potentially going to be part of it. Because as he said, like when you don't perform the way that you're expected to, like management is going to make changes because they're not just going to keep things the same and potentially do, have like the same team 2 years in a row, make the same kind of mistakes. He was asked what his message was to Bruins fans who were upset about the trade and went on to give a 5.5 minute answer to that question. Which by the end of it, like he jokingly caught himself and was like, I realized I'm rambling a bit, but I have a long answer to give. So there's stuff even just within that answer that I think is worth touching on. He reiterated something he said Monday down in Florida about why he has no hard feelings towards management. That he doesn't, even though it is personal in the sense that like it directly affects him, he didn't take it personally and clearly still has a lot of respect for Don Sweeney, Cam Neely, and Charlie Jacobs. I also asked him about David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy taking over as leaders. So, at the risk of rambling myself here, I'll cut it short, but I know we want to start there anyway. So I don't know if you guys had, anything that stood out to you or kind of what your lead takeaways were from Marchand's return to Boston just 4 days after getting traded.
So can I say this first, because I feel like I need to like put this out there, because I saw this going around on Facebook and it was fake. There was an AI version of Marchand's comments being like the exact opposite of what he actually said, and like being like F Neely, F Sweeney, like all this stuff. Like, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it was very realistic looking. I knew it wasn't real because at the time he hadn't spoken yet. But if you watch the video, there was only like something about it. You're like, okay, that's probably fake, but it looked so real. I'm like his real face, his real voice, like. And I
sadly that shit is just like a fact of life now. Like I see it all the time, and it's like
it's so insane. It scares
you
the hell
hope
out of me.
like you hope people are smart enough to just know what's fake, but like obviously that stuff goes viral, so obviously a lot of people aren't.
Yes, so I bring it up because I heard people talking about it out in the real world, and they're like, "Oh, did you hear how mad he was at Sweeney?" And I'm sitting over there going, "Oh my god, this thing that I saw." That, of course, my mom, she's on Facebook, she sends me it, and she's like, "Is this real?" I'm like, "No." But people were talking about it like it was real, and so that's why I felt like we should say it right off, like before we get into his real comments, which were actually really like respectful of Neely and Sweeney and saying that they're the best at their job rather than their rats and their snakes and like it. I just wanted to say that because I know that I was definitely not the only person that saw it, and some people might have believed it at first, but the real comments are the ones we're talking about now that he had. He was even wearing like a Marshy and Miller hat that's like he always it's just weird. But I think that what my main takeaway was that what you would expect it to be an emotional, maybe angry sentiment towards management wasn't there. And that kind of reiterates what some of the numbers that we hear behind the scenes were that wasn't actually that Neely and Sweeney weren't actually lowballing him. It wasn't what they weren't offering him what he wanted, but that's different than a lowball number. And it seems like both sides understood what the business was, and I also don't think Marchand will be back, because I think that door kind of closed probably, unless in the offseason he doesn't get the $7+ million that he was looking for, the number he was looking for in Boston. If that's not out there for him, maybe he is back. But if he goes to free agency, I think he's taking the biggest paycheck that is possible within like a certain number of teams that actually have a chance to win a Stanley Cup. Like that's where I think he'll end up going in the offseason.
Yeah, and on the numbers, like it's worth just hitting this right off the top. It's unfortunate that like the first report on Friday that went viral and got picked up everywhere was that they offered him $3 million a year, because that would be a lowball offer. It took time for that to get corrected. Unfortunately, it was wrong, and 24 hours later, like it had spread everywhere and gotten picked up. They offered him over $6 million a year, first for 2 years and then for 3 years. That's what I had started to hear over the weekend from people, and then that's what Elliot Friedman reported on his Monday morning 32. Well, first Friedman said on Hockey Night in Canada Saturday that they didn't ask him to take a pay cut, but there was like still a little vague where it was like, wait, does he really mean that? Like, hold on, wait, what did he say? Like it was he almost just like mentioned it in passing. Then he expanded on it Monday morning on 32 Thoughts podcast, made it clear, yeah, they offered at least his current cap hit, which is $6.125 million, probably even more than that, but that there was still a gap, that Marchand was looking for more. And then on Tuesday, you got the Spit and Chicklets report from Paul Bissonnette, where he put exact figures on it, said the Bruins offered 6.3, Marchand wanted 7.5. I don't have the exact numbers confirmed, but what I am very comfortable saying is like everyone's right. Like those more recent reports are spot on. Like they offered over 6, he wants over 7. So call it, roughly $1 million or a little bit more in terms of the gap. But you can decide for yourself if like 6.123 is still a low ball offer or not, but it's double the initial low ball offer of what people thought.
Yes, I mean, this is my question, right? Because the three of us talked about before the trade deadline where, Scott, you and I had kind of said that if they weren't close if they weren't at least close to the trade deadline, then they have to consider moving him, right? If they are close, then it might be worth taking the risk on not trading with the deadline, because maybe you could still figure something out in the summer. And I hear these figures, and I don't know why that couldn't have happened. And that's my question, right? And so I want to break it down a little bit. But basically, I loved Boston's trade deadline in the first 4 moves that they made. Okay, I loved the Frederick trade. I liked how they were able to flip that 4th they got for Frederick to get Yoki Haru. I don't know what Minnesota was thinking with the Justin Brazeau trade. I think Boston swindled them there, but we can get into that later. And then the Coyle and the Carlo deals for guys with term, I thought Boston did really well. But all of those still could have happened. And they didn't have to trade Marchand. I watch Lauko out there, and I watch Middlestat, and I watch Husnadonov, and they all play with speed.
So close.
That's not it.
What did I say?
It's Husnadinov. Close though.
Oh, hey, for a last name like that, I'm gonna give myself that. I'm gonna give myself
we'll
that.
give you it. We'll give you it.
Husnadinov.
Pasternak was like, I don't know his name yet.
Kuzi.
I can't say it.
Pasta on Saturday didn't even know his nickname yet. He was like, Kuzi, Cuzzy, Woozy Woozy.
Kuzi, grazie, ciao. But anyway, I watch Husnadinov and Lauko and Middlestat and Yoki Haru, and they all have good speed and skill and tangibles in varying degrees. And I say to myself, that's the style of that's the style that Marchand plays, right? Like, with Brazeau, you lost size. With Frederick, you lost size and some toughness. With Coyle, you lost size and a good veteran presence and a guy who has some offensive ability. With Carlo, you lost size. You know what you didn't lose with those guys was speed and skill, right? Like, that wasn't their MO. But Marchand does have speed and skill, and he kind of fits that mold of what the Bruins brought in at the deadline. And so I say to myself, he would have been a good piece to have with these players. He fits the style of play. And if he was asking for 6'1" or 6'3", I'm sorry, if the Bruins were offering him 6'1" or 6'3", and Marchand's asking for 7.5, and it's reported that Marchand went out there and had a sit down with Sweeney and Neely and said, I'll meet you in the middle because I want to be a Bruin. If the Bruins were already offering him 6'3" or whatever, to go up to 6'8", 6'9", or 7 doesn't seem that crazy if they were already willing to go 6'3". And for some reason, they were hard, steadfast on their offer, whatever it was, 6'1", 6'3". And my question is why? My question is, are they trying to save every penny because there's specific guys that they think they're going to need it for in free agency? Do they think that they wanted to give Marchand a quote-unquote fair offer so that he knew that and that the public knew that, but they weren't really interested in meeting him halfway because maybe they just wanted a change of era? I don't know, guys. I'm really confused because I love the first 4 deals. And if they were really that far off with Marchand, I would understand, trading him, even if the return wasn't great, right? Because you're going to lose him for nothing. But am I crazy in thinking that meeting in the middle of these 2 numbers wasn't that tough to maybe accomplish if they really wanted to keep him?
It's tough if you're already at your limit. Like, if all along you didn't even want to go past 2 years, and finally in the couple weeks leading up, you go to 3, but you're not adding a year and then also adding 5 for 600,000 in AAV. Like, you're saying, okay, Brad, like, here's the best we can do. We'll add that year. We didn't really want to, but we'll add the year. But the AAV offer that's it. Like, that's the highest we're going. This is our best offer. So then if Marchand comes back and says, okay, I'll meet you in the middle, like, it's like, well, no, we already told you, like, this is our best offer. Like, we've made the most of what we are possibly going to offer you is already on the table. So no, like, I'm sorry, but no, we're not now adding 600,000 after a last minute meeting. Like, best offer is best offer. So if that was made clear, and again, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know if this is exactly how it went, but if that was made clear of, like, all right, here's the 3 years on the table, and here's the absolute best AAV we're going to offer you. Well, you don't then just go up another 5 or 600,000, right? Like,
yeah,
that's kind of it.
Well, I'm with you, Brian, in that I see this, like, if we were sitting here today after they beat Tampa Bay, beat Florida, we start to see what they got for some of the other guys, and Marchand is still on the team, I'm feeling very different about what's about to happen in the final, however many games left in the regular season. And like, I'm feeling much different about next year too, because I understand it was time to move on from some of those other guys. Frederick, obviously. Brazo, yes, absolutely. Coyle and Carlo, because they got the right deals, yes. Marchand's deal didn't feel like they got enough, and that's also probably part of the reason why it's hard to get past this one. But it also didn't feel like his time had to end here. And so if he's still on this team and they're 2 points out of the playoffs right now, and they got what they got for Carlo and Coyle and everyone else, I'd be sitting here feeling pretty good. Be sitting here being like, okay, wow, I see where this train is headed next year. They still have a leader. They have a captain. They didn't lose somebody in their top 6. That's really important. Like Brad Marchand, like I would see the vision a lot more.
But then you lose them for nothing in the offseason. Then you get absolutely nothing.
But I'm saying, like, if the extension happened rather than the trade happened. Okay. If that's the reality we were living in, was this week he got the extension done, then I would feel completely different today about what we're talking about. Because I honestly feel like, and Scott, I know what you're saying, like the deal was the deal and they weren't going to go up $600,000. Okay. But I could see this being being a big mistake, because in the next 3 years, I don't think Marchand is going to get like significantly worse. He's going to age, but I don't think he's going to be one of those guys that falls off a cliff. I think that the value that he has as a leader and just as a top 6 guy and as a personality and as a fan favorite, like so many different aspects of who he is, was worth that extra value, that you just would have had to swallow your pride or whatever it is and just do it. Because I now sit here and go, okay, well, and this ties to Brian's opening shift, like, okay, now is Nikita Zadorov a captain? Like, and what is he going to be like? Not like with a C, but like with an A. Like, what is he like as a leader? Pasternak, I actually really believe can be a good leader. I have questions about who else would step up though. And like, that's one thing that they wouldn't have to worry about. And I don't know. I think that it would have been worth paying that, 6.8 or 7 rather than just letting him leave. And like, it's great that the relationship doesn't seem to be severed, but it seems like the decision is made. And the only way he'd be back here in the off season would be if the deal that he was looking for isn't out there. But in free agency, it should be like Stamkos. Like, he'll get more money somewhere else, that as long as he thinks that he can contend and fit into the team, he'll probably go there.
I think I would be very surprised if he came back to Boston. And Marchand himself said this, and I think Sweeney said it as well. Well, I don't know if Marchand said this, but it was kind of between the lines. I don't think either side is really closing that door completely, but I don't think it's preferred. But then again, there's things behind the scenes we'll never know. Like maybe Marchand's wife and family, maybe there's family reasons why they love the Boston area, whether it's schooling or whatever.
Moving, right? They're staying
not,
here.
Not. I don't think this season at least.
Yeah.
Right.
But there could be like from a fan's perspective, it could be easy to be like, oh, Marchand's not coming back to Boston with his tail between his legs. But at home, he could be having conversations with his wife, and it could be like, we love Boston and I'll come back. But but Scott, I wanna go back to something you said, and because I hear what you're saying. Boston has their final offer, and it's their best and final for a reason, right? No, Brad, this is what's on the table. We're not moving up from this, and I understand that, especially from a negotiation standpoint. What I want to know is why. I want to know what intangibles, what decisions went into what was Boston's final offer. You know what I mean? Like, is it that they're projecting outwards and there's certain individuals outside the system right now that they want to go after, that they think that they need all their resources to do so? Does Boston think that maybe we do want to see if McAvoy and Pastrnak can take that next step? Like, because if moving on from Marchand, who, by the way, is turning 37 in May, right? So the Bruins were either trading him now at the deadline for a return, they were losing him for nothing in the offseason, or maybe they re-signed him for 3 years. But eventually, my point is they had to get used to life without him sooner than later anyway. And maybe the Bruins, if the result of moving on from Marchand is that David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy find that next level of leadership, then you could sit there and say, you know what? Maybe those guys don't get to those leadership heights if we kept Brad for a couple of years. So I'm not even here to judge necessarily that moving on from Marchand is emphatically a mistake. I think from a hockey perspective, it would have made sense to keep him around for a couple of more years from a production standpoint and a locker room standpoint. What I'm so curious about is why Boston got to their number that they got to as their best and final, not so much that they stuck to it.
Yeah, so it's fair. And I guess what the sense I get is, to some extent, they were okay with completely ripping the Band-Aid off and moving on from Marchand and thrusting Pastrnak and McAvoy into those roles. I don't think they necessarily wanted to do that. Like, I don't think it was like, oh yeah, we'll make an offer to Brad, but like, it's not really going to be competitive. We don't actually want to sign him. We just want to save face. Like, I don't think it was that. I think if he had agreed to their terms, they would have signed him. But I do think there was a part of them that was okay with, all right, if we have to move on, we move on, and we're officially on to the next era. Like, we had a caller on Sunday Skate who, and these are different situations, but like, compared it to the Celtics trading away Marcus Smart and forcing Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to really make the Celtics their team, because they'd been in a spot where like they were still kind of just deferring to Marcus Smart, even though he wasn't the best player anymore, even though it really should have been Tatum and Brown's team. There is kind of that element. Now, Brad Marchand, a much greater Bruin than Marcus Smart was a Celtic. So again, like, not apples to apples. But at some point, this has to be David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy's team. And as long as Marchand's here, it's not. It's Marchand's team. And like, Marchand even said this himself when answering the question I asked about Pastrnak and McAvoy taking over. He said, complete faith in those guys to carry on culture and like, not just carry it, but you got to leave it better than you found it. Especially with the term those guys are on and how young they are. I think they have a great opportunity ahead of them to kind of carve their own path and build a legacy that they're excited about and lead the way that they want to. And then he said, like, that's what Chara and Bergeron did. Chara especially, like, came in and molded the Bruins into what he wanted them to be. And now we'll see like what that is with Pastrnak and McAvoy. Like, maybe they're not up to the task and they really don't change much and it doesn't look like anything. But if there's any vision they have or anything like they want to do or anything they want to change, that's not really happening as long as Marchand is here, because Marchand's the captain as long as he's here. And ultimately, like, everything kind of falls under what he wants it to be. So again, I'm not trying to say that it's definitely a good thing that like they're moving on from Marchand, because it might not be. It might be a disaster. There might not be enough leadership here. They might not find a top 6 wing to replace his production. Like, it's possible this turns out to be a mistake. But I do think, like, because they have to retool and reset anyways, thrusting the guys who have to take over for this next era, like putting them at the top now, I think in their eyes is not the worst thing. Like,
they got to find out.
Yeah, exactly.
They got to find out now, because if you keep Marchand for 3 more years, let's say, well, now you're delaying the answer to that question of, can McAvoy and can Pastrnak be the leaders we hope they are? But at that point, they're 30 and 31. So maybe Boston just said, we we want to see now. We want to see now if they're ready.
I think I have a completely different point of view on this than you guys. It's not Game of Thrones. Like, you don't have to kill the older brother in order for the younger one to come take over. Like, it's so they're not finding out right away. Like, oh well. Like, they'll figure it out when they have to when it's their time to figure it out. Like, I don't see, like, to me, that's not. I don't know. I just don't look at it that way. And also, how dare you slander my guy Marcus?
I disagree, Bridgette. I mentioned a few months ago to you guys that like I do think there's an element of deferring. Like when you have somebody who's senior to you, when you have
what is like sure, you're deferring to Marchand, but like was that a bad thing? Like
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, can we be real? Like, how has the leadership been this season?
Yeah, I mean, it's the locker room. The locker room clearly was disjointed, and look, maybe it's because there wasn't enough talent in the room, and those frustrations were being projected on. Like I don't really know what was leading to the locker room being disjointed. Maybe it was just because the team wasn't good enough from a talent perspective, and it bled over to the locker room. But to answer your question, Bridgette, like I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but again, when you have franchise players who are approaching 30 and Marchand is not longed for the league, let alone for the Bruins. Like I just think it's a real thing. It's a reality. And you don't know what you're capable of until you're asked to do more. And I just think it's a human nature thing.
I know. I don't think we're going to agree on this, but you know, it to me, it's like, I understand it as a silver lining. Like, hey, these guys are going to figure like as like one of the, okay, well, there is a little bit of positive, right? Like, but I don't think it's necessarily like, oh, this is like a great thing. Like who knows what it's going to look like? We don't know. And I don't think Marchand was the problem. So but
it's also responsible, right? Like you want McAvoy and Pastrnak to become the best leaders that they can be, because there was going to come a time when Marchand wasn't around, just like Bergeron and Char left, and you want to make sure that when Marchand is no longer around, that the leadership is in the best hands. And I just think that I don't see why it would be a bad thing for McAvoy to want to find out if McAvoy and Pastrnak can step up and lead without Marchand, because guess what? Whether you like it or not, that time was going to come anyway, and they'd rather them be prepared for that moment than not be.
I think it'll end up being Pasta, by the way. Like, I think Pastrnak is the next.
Feels that way, huh?
Yeah, that's what I think. And that's kind of what we got from the room last night, too. I don't know if you got that a little bit, Scott.
Well, he's getting a clear head start, right? Like, yeah. I mentioned this on Sunday Skate, but it's like and I mentioned when I was on with Jones and Keefe, Monday. All my days are blurring together. But like he's the only guy there right now. I mean, I know Zadorov stepping up, and I think Swayman's taking on a little bit of leadership too. But there's a reason that David Pastrnak is the only one wearing a letter these last two games. Like Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm obviously can wear letter. Like McAvoy was already an A. Hampus Lindholm has worn it before. They're rehabbing injuries. They're not there. They weren't down in Tampa. They were back in Boston rehabbing. So when everything hits the fan Friday afternoon and they have to find a way to turn around and play a game Saturday afternoon, like Pasternak's the guy that everyone in that room is turning to, because he's the only one. He's the only veteran, anything resembling a veteran leader that's been around, that the rest of that team can look to in that moment. So this is like, you know, whether Pasternak's really ready for it or not, it's like he's been thrown right into like a very difficult situation to lead a team through. And we're still early in this, but so far, again, like, I don't think we have to give Pastrnak all the credit for this. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of guys who deserve credit, but whatever has happened in that room these last 4 days, it's led to two damn good efforts on the ice. So it's like something's going right so far. We'll see if it continues, but like, I think you got to give Pastrnak some credit there, and certainly his teammates have. So yeah, like, that's not to say that Charlie McAvoy wouldn't be a real positive influence to have in there right now, and that he wouldn't be able to help as well. But the fact is, it's just different when you're rehabbing an injury and you're not on the ice at the same time as the team. You're not traveling with the team. Like, it's hard to lead by Zoom. Like, that's what I would say.
So it's interesting because up until this season, I feel like if you were to ask Bruins fans who is the next captain after Marchand, I feel like more people than not would say Charlie McAvoy. But I put up this poll on Twitter in recent days asking that very question because you can kind of sense the tide's turning a bit. Pastrnak has stepped up, and yeah, Scott, the way you just said it is true with McAvoy. You can't lead through Zoom, right? So the results were interesting. 57% of voters said David Pastrnak should be the next captain of the Bruins, and 43% said Charlie McAvoy. One of our listeners, Sean, said if the Bruins hired Mike Sullivan, which is somebody, Scott, that I know you'd be interested in if the Penguins fired him. If Mike Sullivan was the next head coach, he would probably choose Charlie McAvoy, to which I responded, #captain-in-law. But besides that, I do think Pastrnak, of those two, could be wrong, I think would be, but yeah, who knows?
I think that, and he's also older, right? He's been on the team longer. So it's like, if you're talking about like a pure like succession of veterans, like that would be Pastrnak. If you're talking about a guy that has been really consistent and has a good personality, like we know his personality, and his ability to maybe make things light too in his own way, rather than Marchand, making like a smart ass joke for pasta. He just like knows how to have fun, and he'll put Barbie girl on or something. But I see him as somebody that would make a good captain, and that, I mean, he's vocal, but not in like the same kind of ways as Bergeron and Marchand and Chara, like, because those guys are always like, this is what's happening, and maybe because he hasn't had to, but like, like kind of like, this is what we're doing, like this, just trying to actually give advice about stuff. I see Pastrnak more as like hey, we're just gonna, this is how we're gonna do it today, and it's gonna be fun, it's gonna be not as stressful. I don't know. I think he would be good at it, and I think he does have the lead for multiple reasons. And I would think that the C is probably with him next year. And does some of it have to do with the fact that Charlie McAvoy is injured? Yeah, like that for sure doesn't give him a chance to make that push right now, and to be that guy that guys lean on right now, and already start to form those leadership bonds.
Yeah, it's actually interesting when you think about just how long, Bridgette, to your point about Pastrnak being a senior on this team. David Pastrnak has been here for so long that his first head coach in Boston was Claude Julien, right? He was here during the end of Milan Lucic's first stint in Boston. Obviously, the second stint didn't last very long. But when you look back at that roster that David Pastrnak was on his rookie year, I think Chris Kelly, was on that roster. Maybe even Greg Campbell or maybe Paille. Like, you still had some guys on that roster from the 2011 Cup team. Dennis Seidenberg, I believe, was on that team. In fact, David Pastrnak was on the Bruins roster only 2 seasons after their loss to the Blackhawks in the 13 final. So he's been around a long time, and he's seen a lot of leaders come in and out of that room. And he's grown from an 18-year-old kid to a 28-year-old star, elite player in this league. And I can't ignore the leadership and the way that he has stepped up in a very tough situation, as you guys mentioned. And something, you watched that game last night, he was a man on a mission in that third period. You can just see the give a shit meter for him is through the roof right now. And I know the team played well last night as a whole, but I think the case he's making for himself right now is a big one.
I mean, that winning goal, the play to spin off Gustav Forsling and then set up Zacha. Like, we are on the record as Forsling stands. We're all big fans of him. Like, that's world-class defender there that he just shakes and leaves in his dust. Yeah, and the finish on the first goal on a nice pass from Casey Middlestat, and at first looked like a disastrous play by Elias Lindholm. It was like, oh, that's gonna be a turnover. Credit to Lindholm sticking with it. Second effort wins it back and gets it down to Middlestat. I mean, I know we're kind of running low on time, so I don't know if we want to transition to the game a little bit and some of the new guys, but like Middlestat right there is, a decent place to start. 2 assists now in 2 games, and really should be 3 assists, honestly, because he got his first assist on the Tampa game taken away because it was like technically an own goal. It went off a Tampa stick, so it ended up being an unassisted goal, but he created the whole thing by forcing the steal. I think I like what I've seen from him. There was a rush yesterday where he, with speed, takes the puck straight through center ice from his own zone into the offensive zone. And it's like, yeah, that's what he was brought in for. Like, transport the puck, speed through the middle of the ice. And you just see it and you're like, man, how few rushes like that have we seen this year from this Bruins team, where it's just like one guy with the head of steam picks it up and boom, like automatic transition 2 seconds later.
Well, Bridgette and Scott, I have some news here. And despite his recent hat trick with the Providence Bruins, I am resigning as president of the hashtag Wally Gang. And I am the leading candidate to be president for the hashtag Koozie Gang. I love Kus Nadinov, and he's a little water bug, and I love his energy. And in all seriousness, Scott, you talk about the new guys, and this is why I want to take Marchand and put him off to the side, because the Bruins were actively without him heading into the deadline due to his injury, and they would have been without him for the few ensuing weeks anyway. So player in, player out at the trade deadline, again, not including Marchand, I think the speed and the pace that you've injected into this lineup compared to the guys that left is evident. Like, in practice and in their last 2 games against Tampa and Florida, Boston has played with more pace, and it's led to them closing gaps more on the forecheck. They're getting in on the forecheck quicker. They're making opponents make decisions before they want to. They're giving opponents less time with the puck, and it's leading to turnovers. I think when you're playing with speed and playing with pace, you're not chasing the play. And so I think that's been evident. Like, again, you lost Carlo, you lost his size, his ranginess, his leadership. But Yoki Haru has come in, and I'm not trying to compare the guys apples to apples, but Yoki Haru has been in a Buffalo system that's been putrid. He's been behind some top draft picks on the depth chart. And you watch his game. His skating, his stick, his smarts, and his first pass ability, it's there. He has those to his game. It's about putting it together consistently at the NHL level. But his skill set is that of a good NHL defenseman if he's in the right situation. I think he's shown that in the last couple of games. He's been impressive. Lauko
played over 20 minutes too.
Yeah, he's good. He's good. So, and again, when you think about how, don't look at Brandon Carlo's career as a Bruin, but if you look at in a vacuum just this season, him out, Yoki Haru in, because Carlo was struggling this year, that's not really a net negative for the Bruins. I don't, in my opinion, necessarily through what I've seen so far. Lauko is who he is. He's a bull in a china closet. He's got a ton of speed and energy, but the puck's a hot potato on a stick. Okay, but he brings a lot of speed. Kus Nadinov brings speed in the forecheck, but he also has that skill. And you guys spoke about Middlestat recently. So if there's anything we can say, and here's the thing, because I'm still stuck in this place where I still want the Bruins to get as high as a draft pick as possible. But up until the deadline, I kept saying, oh, don't win games because I don't want this management to be fooled and not. Well, the fact that they sold the pieces I wanted them to sell, I'm kind of breathing a little easier now. I still want them to get a high draft pick, but I can't help but feel good for this team and root for them at this moment with everything that they're dealing with. And their pace has just been improved. And I think that's an objective observation so far through the brief couple of games we've seen. I'm not putting a ceiling or a floor on this roster. I know it needs work, but the roster needed work before. I couldn't watch Brazeau and Frederick just half-ass a forecheck anymore. Like Kuznetsov, Kus Nadinov, Koozie. He gets in there hard. Kuzmenko,
Kucherov.
Kuzi and Lauko, their hard work leads to Lorai's tying goal. I like the pace, and I know they have work to do, but I like the pace increase. It's a better product, and it's a harder product to face as an opposition when you have people forcing you to make decisions earlier than you want to. And I think this Bruins team is doing that more so now than they've done, ironically, all year so far.
Well, if you look
Bridgette,
at it,
quick, but before you jump in, quote from Pavel Zacha that in 2 seconds just like summed it up perfectly after the game. We're hard to play against now, and we're a fast team. Like, bingo.
Okay. All right, Pavel, just jump in with that. Like, speak your mind, I guess. No, so what I was gonna say is, if you're looking at like the 1-for-1s, and this is not 1-for-1 as like who they got, but who they're replacing. Like Yoki Haru for Carlo. Don't think that's a terrible trade-off. Middlestat for Coyle. What are we thinking on what he brings compared to what Coyle was doing?
Bridgette, can I just add to that real quick? Middlestat has 36 points this year. Coyle and Frederick combined have 38.
And was Coyle as effective on the power play as it appears Middlestat can be?
Now, by the way, was Marchand as effective on the power play as Middlestat might be? Like, I know like we've talked about before, and it's like it's an uncomfortable conversation, but we criticize McAvoy a lot for the power play, and rightfully so. Like, he struggled running it, but a lot of power plays also died on Marchand's stick. Like, this isn't revisionist history. We would talk about it over and over. Like, he would tend to just hold on to pucks and like hold, and it's like you got to move. Like, feet, it's got to be moving, or the puck's got to be moving. And too many times it would slow down. It's like I'm not burying the guy just because he's gone. Obviously, we all love a lot of what Marchand did, but on the power play specifically, like, he was part of the problem. Again, it takes more than one person for your top power play unit to struggle. It's not just on one guy.
Yeah, and then you see like who's Nadinov is in for Frederick. Like, we're still figuring out who's Nadinov is and what his comp is. But then you have Brazo out, Lauko in. I don't have an issue with that. Lauko's a great forechecker. He's one of the reasons why Lorai scored his goal, because that line just came in on a hard forecheck and forced the puck to just kind of pop out, and it popped right out to Lorai. So when you go 1-for-1 like that, you don't feel like it's that bad, right? And you've got draft picks, and you've got other stuff besides just these players that you're using right now. It's the Marchand thing that's harder to get around. Maybe one day, maybe next year when they sign a big free agent with the money that they had to save, by getting rid of Marchand, we'll be like, okay, I get it. But right now, it's harder to see that. But we can take that aside for a second and talk about the 1-for-1 with the other guys, and it looks like it works, right? Not saying it is a winning roster for a cup, but it's not like you got worse in those spots so much so that you're like, okay, what happened?
Right. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier, was they already were a bad roster with Coyle, with Carlo, with Brazo, with Frederick, with Marchand. And again, I know we're not really including Marchand in this because he could have been part of the solution as well. But they were already a bottom 5-7 team in every team category. They were all like, so the difference is, and Scott, I think I said these to you last week, but it felt like before the deadline, the Bruins were in a stalemate and they were just driving down a dead-end street. And now it feels like they're driving down a street that has a cul-de-sac where they can turn around and head back in the other direction. And I think that's encouraging. And yeah, it's a positive development to see. And I just, in addition to what Will Zellers is he is looking to be a very impressive prospect. I'm very curious to see how he does at North Dakota next year. Lighting the USHL on fire right now. And then Fraser.
Didn't I see that two of Bruins prospects are top 5 in the USHL?
Who the other one?
I know what you're talking about. It was a funky stat because it was like the top 5 USHL scorers that have been drafted. And it's like,
that have
well,
been drafted.
yeah,
Oh,
a lot of
that
USHL players haven't been drafted.
Yeah, that's true. As with like a lot of college players are drafted, but there's a few that aren't. And like Macklin Celebrini won the Hobey Baker, but he wasn't drafted at the time.
Right.
So yeah, there's a caveat there.
I mean, you could make the argument, right? And it's not apples to apples because Charlie Coyle fills exactly what Colorado needs for their cup run. He's a third line center for them, just like he was a third line center for the Bruins in 19, and just like he was a third line center for the Bruins teams that were, knocking on the door. But you can make the argument, skill in, skill out, that Middlestat is younger and more skilled than Coyle. In addition, you get a second-round pick. In addition, you get the rights to Will Zellers. By the way, Coyle was gone after next year. So that, like, Zellers could be a good piece down the line. But right now, Middlestat's a good piece. Fraser Mitten is somebody who's in Providence right now. And, he could be an imminent player in Boston. He already has almost 20 games to his name in Toronto. And so a lot of people are looking at the Marchand trade because it was the last one and the return wasn't great. But yes, Coyle, Frederick, Carlo, Brazeau brought you some picks and prospects, but they also brought you some NHL players right now that you're seeing in these last couple of games that bring different elements than the guys that left. They don't have the size and they don't have the NHL pedigree that the guys that just left town did, right? And the leadership intangibles that Coyle and Carlo had. And Frederick's been around for a bit, and Brazeau for a cup of coffee. They don't have exactly what left the door, but they have something different that left the door. And I think I think we're seeing that. And I just wanted to talk about the NHL guys that came in, or guys that are trying to prove themselves in the NHL with some potential, because it's kind of been under the radar a little bit. There's been so much focus on the Bruins traded 5 guys. They traded 5 guys, but they also got 4 guys back and some picks and prospects too. So
yeah, and beyond what I want to, I think probably the last thing I'll say, like beyond, the skill sets and the individuals, the biggest thing right now is you just have a motivated team working hard. And like, so, we talked about how Friday was obviously like a shock to the system, like a complete reset. And yeah, like trading Marchand is part of that. Like how you can't have much of a bigger shock than trading away the captain. And I think, a quote from Joe Sacco after Tuesday's game, what I thought was good because it hit on, like, he said, we have new players here. It's opportunity for these guys. However they want it, whatever motivates them. If it's the underdog role, taking that on. If it's, I have an opportunity here, maybe that I didn't have before somewhere else. But what I'm trying to do and what we're trying to do as a staff is we want to see us come together as a hockey team as quickly as we can. And I think that produces winning hockey. And the key part there is the whatever motivates guys. Like, because you now have a team full of guys with all kinds of different things that could be motivating them. Like for some guys, it's let's go prove everyone wrong. Everyone's counting us out. For some guys, it's a fresh start. The new guys coming in. Middlestat was having a down year. Yoki Haru wasn't getting used the way he thought he should be in Buffalo. Like, fresh start for guys is motivation. For other guys, it's more playing time than they were going to get. Cole Koepke is playing in the middle 6 now. Vinny Lettieri is getting a tremendous opportunity. Like, these guys weren't getting these chances before. So they're motivated to show that they deserve an NHL job, whether it's here or somewhere else in the offseason. So we'll see how long this lasts, and we'll see what it leads to, because ultimately there is still just like a serious lack of talent on this team, top to bottom, right? Like you have Koepke, Lettieri, Lauko, like playing in your middle 6. Love the effort from those guys, but like, let's be real, they're not middle 6 forwards on a good NHL team. But hard work gets you somewhere, and motivation gets you somewhere. And that's what we're seeing. So far, it's gotten them 2 damn good wins over really good teams.
Yeah, I mean, Peake and Wotherspoon are guys on the back end that have also kind of had to step up. I know McAvoy and Lindholm have been out for a long time. Lindholm in particular has been out since November, but you see the back end, Lori's having to step up, Zadorov. So those guys are getting, prominent minutes. And yeah, Scott, like Koepke is a guy that had a good start to the year, and then you kind of lost him. right? And he's one of a couple of examples of guys that were here all year that kind of seem to be rejuvenated too in the last couple of games. And I'm not saying these are long-term fixes or long-term solutions. And also they're running out of time. Like they're still outside the playoff picture by a couple of points, and other teams have games in hand. So, I all I know is that last night against the Panthers and this week so far for the Bruins, these last 2 wins, I think they've been good for Bruins fans and for the locker room, because I think that people have needed something, because we haven't had anything to cheer about all year as a Bruins fan and in that locker room. And, if they come out in these last 2 games and just got shell-shocked and lost by a combined score of like 10-1 or something, this is a pretty dismal, 20 games to finish up, or 17 games. But they've gone the exact opposite direction, and good for them, right? Good for them, and good for Bruins fans at the Garden last night to finally see some life. And again, like I said, that's a game the Bruins lose all year going away 4-0. They come back against the Panthers, who had let up 1 goal in 3 games, and in dramatic fashion, and good for them. Like, that was a feel-good game, feel-good moment for the team and the fan base last night. We'll see what the next 17 or 16 games brings for them.
Yeah, gotta go.
All righty.
My very last. Just
God.
because we haven't mentioned it yet, but Nikita Zadorov loved this quote post game. All the guys since Friday have been showing up ready to work their balls off and play for the Crest. There's no quit in this team.
Bridgette's
just a great quote.
Thanks for getting that one in at the buzzer.
Bridget's like, you kept me around for that one? No, that was funny, Scott.
I was there for it. Sometimes I'm afraid to ask him questions because I'm afraid to hear his answers.
I like that.
He's so intimidating. He really is.
Yeah, so I ended up using that in my headline, but I like when I have to debate if I'm allowed to use a quote in a headline.
You use the word balls in your headline?
Yeah. Who's going to stop me? I'm the website editor.
I don't know. I guess you are the boss, Scott, so you can do whatever the hell you want.
Maybe I should check to see if I have any texts or emails from Mike Thomas.
Yeah, oh, sorry, man. Had to let you go. It's okay. It's what we weren't waiting for that anyway, but
Bridget, right, let's get you out of here so you can broadcast.
Yes, I wanted to say, I did want to say, so this week is the start of the Hockey East men's playoffs, and I'm doing 2 games on Nest and 3 games total, once radio. I don't expect people to listen to that one, but I'll be at Merrimack tonight. Brian's alma mater. I'm broadcasting Scott's alma mater on Saturday. I'll be at BU. Whoever they face, they won't know until Wednesday night. Who
could be UMass.
It could be UMass BU. And then tonight it's Northeastern Merrimack that I'm doing. So anyway, tune in on Nesson if you want to watch some college hockey. I'll be there. Hopefully my voice is better. I'm a little bit under the weather, but.
And then, so definitely tune into Bridgette. And then Thursday, big game for the Bruins. You're playing the Senators. That's a big game in the standings, right? You can say what you want about, anything with the roster or their expectations, but for the NHL players in that room, it's a big game. And Friday morning, you can listen to the Skate Pod, and we will be recapping everything. So thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy your work week, and we will see you on Friday. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.